Alright, so after you have your flat bar jig built, the next thing we're going to do is we're going to actually start putting in our cross pieces, louvers. So to do this, you're going to need to clamp the bottom side edge of your rack flush with the edge of your work table. So as you can see here, I got my bottom edge flush with the side of my work table, clamped on both corners, and then also clamped once up here. So I would do something similar to this. If you're short on clamps, you can tack the front side. Just make sure your tack is somewhere where it's accessible and easy to cut off when you're done. So once you have your rack clamped flush with the edge of your table, we're going to go ahead and start putting in the louvers. Okay, so once you got your rack clamped down to your work table and square with the edge of your work table, we're going to start putting in the louvers. So we're going to make 4 measurements, 2 sets of 4 measurements, and these are our spacing measurements for our louvers. So refer to your blueprint. It will have all the measurements that you need, and they're going to be different between Ford and Dodge. I'm doing a Dodge rack here, but if you're doing a Ford, everything's going to be the same, just the measurements are going to be different, and it will lay those out clearly in your blueprint. So the measurements are all going to be in reference to the bottom side of piece C. So I'm doing a Dodge rack, so I'm going to go ahead and make 4 measurements on both sides. The first measurement is 3 inches from the bottom side. The second one is 6.5. Then we have 10 inches, and then 13.5 inches. If you're doing Ford, then the measurements are going to be 3.5 down from the top side of PC, 7.5 inches, 11.5 inches, and 14.5 inches. So you're going to need 2 sets of measurements. That way it keeps it square on the inside of your rack. If you only have one, you don't know if your jig's going to be at the wrong angle. If you have 2, you can reference it off both, and it's going to keep it square. So once you have your measurements drawn, again off the bottom side of PC, we're going to start by placing our jig at the bottom mark. And the reason you want to start from the bottom is because this is going to be the longest louver, and if you accidentally screw it up and cut it off too short, you can just move it up to the next louver because it's going to be a little shorter. So start on the bottom and refer to your blueprint again for the measurements on your louver. So one thing I will say about that is if your rack isn't absolutely perfect, you know, if you got one of your pieces off a 1/4 inch or something isn't welded quite up to par, which I built a lot of these and usually something is slightly off, even if you're a 1/16 off. So what I would suggest is making your louvers a 1/4 inch longer than what I tell you to do in the list, because you can always cut it down to make it fit. So I'm going to start with this bottom louver. We're going to lay it in here, and actually before you do that, so I'm going to clamp this jig down so it doesn't move. If you don't have enough clamps for this, you can also tack weld it and then just cut it loose after each time. I would do it here on the back side, somewhere accessible with your cutting wheel, so you can cut this off. But I'm going to go ahead and clamp this down so it doesn't move. And again, your front edge of your flat bar jig should be flush with the lines that you have drawn. So after you get that clamped down, I'm going to go ahead and put this in first. And this is your bottom louver, which should be the longest one. And as you can see here, it's going to rest at the proper angle, which is the purpose of this jig. So you know you have it the correct length when you can move it back and forth just a little bit, because if you have it too long, it's going to be completely tight on each side. And if you get out to the side and look down your louver, if you eye it down this way, it's going to have a little bit of a bow in it. So you know you have the right length of louver when you can look at it from the side with your eye down the edge and it's completely straight. So I'm going to go ahead and do that. So this one is in straight, so I'm going to go ahead and tack it in. I'm going to go ahead and tack it in. So after you do that, we're just going to go ahead and repeat the steps for all 4 of these louvers. And once you get it tacked in, I will show you the next step. Alright, so as you can see, I got all 4 of my louvers in here. They should only be tacked on each end. Don't weld them up solid yet until you do this next step. So the next step is you're going to put in from your blueprint the louver cut list. These are piece E. There should be 2 of them. Depending on whether you're doing Ford or Dodge, they will vary in length a little bit, so just refer to the cut list for which length you will be using. So these are just your vertical cross members that go into onto your rack. So the spacing is kind of up to you. I like to put them 16 inches apart from the inside, so there's 16 inches between inside and inside. So the way you do that is you just measure the overall outside length of the bottom piece and then put a mark in the center. So I have a center mark here and then just 8 inches off of each side of that. And then what I do is I tack in this bottom side here. So put your inside edge of both of your PCs on this line that you'll get your 16-inch spacing. This just lays flat on your 4 louvers, and if you've done everything else correctly to this point, this should be flush right here, this piece E and this bottom cross member. So I'm going to go ahead and just do a tack on this inside one. Go ahead and do that on both sides. Okay, now after that, I only tack one side so it has a little flexion in it. I get my square and then just make sure this thing is in square, and then throw a tack weld up here on the top side. So I'm going to go ahead and, this is also a good way to do it. You can just lay your square flat and then just kind of pull it into square. Weld your top side. Same thing on the other side. And this should be 16 inches spacing at the top side if you do this correctly. Alright, so once you got all of those tacked in, you can go ahead and tack your other 2 sides and then put some solid beads on all of these. If you put in your louvers correctly, they should all be contacting at all 4 of these. So I'm going to go ahead and do a solid bead on all of these and then also double tack each of these. And from there we'll go on to the next step. So I'm going to go ahead and do that. Okay, so once you get all that done, you're going to want to grind these welds off smooth as we're going to put our piece of 4-inch by 1/8-inch flat bar or your piece of diamond plate over the top of this. You want a nice smooth surface here. So grind these 2 welds off flat. Okay, so after you got your vertical cross members tacked in on all your pieces of flat bar and welded solid on both ends, next thing we're going to do is just solid weld all these seams of your louvers to the side of your outer main frame. So just make sure you get both sides on all 4 of them on both sides. So there should be 16 total beads, 8 on each side. So go ahead and do that.